I stepped off that 10-hour flight from Seattle to Philadelphia, feeling exhausted but excited. 2 years away from family for work, and Mom had begged me to come home for Christmas. When she opened the front door, there was no hello, no hug, no warmth, just 5 cold words that shattered everything. You'll babysit your brother's kids. We're going on a family trip. My brother Marcus laughed from behind her, telling his 3 children, "Don't wipe your snot on our kids." The whole family erupted in laughter at his joke. I just smiled calmly and said, "Actually, I have something to tell you all first." That's when my mother's face drained of every drop of color, and she started whispering, "No, no, no way." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's whispered denials hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. I looked around at their faces, seeing confusion mixed with growing panic, and knew I had their complete attention for the first time in years. "I know about Grandpa William's estate," I said quietly, watching, as Marcus stopped laughing and Dad's newspaper crumpled in his suddenly tense hands. "I know about the $200,000 you've been hiding from me for 3 years. Sarah, my younger sister, dropped her coffee mug. It shattered against the kitchen tiles with a sharp crack that made everyone jump. She had been standing in the doorway, probably ready to join in the family joke at my expense, but now she was frozen like a deer in headlights. Mom found her voice first, though it came out as a weak croak. "Edward, sweetie, I don't know what you think you found, but I found the real estate probate documents." I continued pulling out my phone and showing them screenshots I had carefully saved. Grandpa left his estate to be divided equally among his 4 grandchildren. That means Marcus, Sarah, me, and cousin Jennifer each got $50,000 from the main estate, plus I got an additional $150,000 from his investment accounts because I was named specifically in the will. The color had completely drained from Dad's face now, too. He set down his newspaper with shaking hands and cleared his throat. "Son, there were debts, legal fees. You know how these things work." "No, Dad, there weren't." I scrolled through more documents on my phone. I hired an estate attorney in Seattle 6 months ago when I started getting suspicious about why I never received any paperwork. Turns out the estate was settled cleanly. No debts, minimal legal fees. Every dollar accounted for. Marcus finally found his voice, but it came out aggressive and defensive, just like when we were kids, and he got caught stealing from my piggy bank. "So what if we used some of your money? You were 3,000 miles away, never visited, never called. We had expenses." "What kind of expenses?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite the rage building inside my chest. "Like your new Ford F-250 that you bought 6 months ago. The one with the leather seats and premium sound system that costs more than most people make in a year?" His jaw dropped. I could see him trying to figure out how I knew about his truck purchase. Or maybe Mom's kitchen renovation last spring. I turned to face her directly. "Those granite countertops and custom cabinets didn't pay for themselves, did they?" Mom started crying then. Not the gentle tears of someone who felt guilty, but the desperate sobbing of someone who had been caught red-handed. "Edward, please, you have to understand. We were going to pay you back." "With what money?" I asked. "And when you've had 3 years to mention this to me, 3 years to include me in any family financial discussions, 3 years to treat me like an actual family member instead of some distant relative who sends Christmas cards." Sarah finally spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "We thought you wouldn't miss it. You have that tech job, you make good money." "That's not the point, Sarah." I looked at each of them in turn, seeing decades of family dynamics suddenly making horrible sense. "The point is that you all sat around a table somewhere, probably in this very kitchen, and decided together that Edward doesn't deserve his inheritance. Edward lives far away, so Edward doesn't matter. Edward's family, but not really family. The worst part was watching their faces as they realized I was right. Not a single one of them could meet my eyes. They had conspired against me, their own flesh and blood, and they had felt completely justified in doing it. That's why you wanted me to babysit while you all go on vacation, isn't it? The pieces were falling into place now. You figured you'd butter me up with family time, get me to watch the kids, so you wouldn't have to pay for childcare, and I'd never be the wiser about how you funded your little Bahamas getaway. Dad tried one more deflection. Now hold on, son. You're making this sound much worse than it is. We're family. Family helps family. You're absolutely right, Dad. Family does help family. I put my phone back in my pocket and looked around the room one more time. That's exactly what I planned to do. The confusion on their faces was almost comical. They had expected anger, maybe shouting possibly threats of legal action. But my calm determination seemed to frighten them more than any tantrum could have. I've already contacted the estate attorney, I said quietly. I have copies of every document, every transaction, every check that was written from Grandpa's accounts. I know where my money went down to the last penny. Marcus stepped forward then, and for a moment I thought he might try to intimidate me physically like he used to when we were teenagers. But something in my expression stopped him cold. I wasn't the same scared kid who used to hide from his bullying older brother. You can't prove anything, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, I can. Bank records are surprisingly detailed these days. Your truck loan application, for instance, shows a cash down payment of exactly $25,000 made on the same day Mom and Dad deposited money into your account. Money that came directly from Grandpa's estate account. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Outside, I could hear Marcus's kids playing in the backyard, their laughter a sharp contrast to the tomb-like atmosphere inside the house. Finally, Mom wiped her eyes and tried one last manipulation tactic, the one that had worked on me countless times growing up. Edward, honey, you're tearing this family apart. Is money really more important than family? I almost laughed at the irony. You're the ones who chose money over family, Mom. You chose it 3 years ago, when you decided I didn't deserve what Grandpa left me. You chose it again when you planned this whole vacation scheme instead of just being honest with me. I picked up my suitcase, the same one I had dropped by the door just 15 minutes earlier when I still thought I was coming home to a loving family Christmas. Here's what's going to happen, I said, and my voice carried an authority that surprised even me. You're going to cancel your vacation. You're going to sit down with me tomorrow morning, and we're going to have a very detailed conversation about exactly how my inheritance money gets returned to me with interest. And then we're going to talk about what kind of relationship, if any, we're going to have going forward. As I headed toward the front door, I heard Mom whisper to Dad, "He can't really do anything legal, can he? I mean, we're family." I turned back one last time. Being family didn't stop you from stealing from me, Mom. Don't expect it to stop me from getting justice. The look of absolute terror that crossed her face told me everything I needed to know about how seriously they were starting to take this situation. I spent that first night at a hotel near the airport, but by morning, my phone was buzzing with calls and text messages. The family had clearly held an emergency meeting after I left, and now they were launching what I recognized as a coordinated campaign to get me back under their control. The first call came from Mom at 7 in the morning, her voice thick with tears and desperation. "Edward, sweetheart, please come home. We need to talk about this like a family." When I didn't immediately agree to rush back, the calls started coming every hour. Dad tried the stern father approach, informing me that I was being childish and vindictive over what he called a simple misunderstanding. Sarah sent long text messages about how I was destroying the family and making everyone miserable during the holidays. But it was Marcus who really showed his true colors. His voicemail left around noon was pure venom. "You always thought you were better than the rest of us, didn't you? Moving to Seattle, getting your fancy tech job, acting like you're too good for your own family. Well, congratulations, Edward. You've officially become the family disappointment. That afternoon, I drove back to the house, but not because their manipulation was working. I'd spent the morning doing more research, and what I found made their behavior even more disgusting than I had initially realized. When I walked through the front door, they were all waiting for me in the living room, arranged like some kind of intervention. Mom had clearly been crying for hours, her eyes red and puffy. Dad sat stiffly in his recliner, trying to project authority he didn't possess. Sarah perched on the edge of the couch, looking guilty and miserable. Marcus lounged in the corner chair, arms crossed, radiating hostility. "Thank God you came back," Mom said, reaching for me like she wanted a hug. I stepped back, and the hurt that flashed across her face was almost enough to make me feel guilty. Almost. "We've been talking," Dad began, "and we want to make this right. We never meant for you to feel excluded or—" "Stop," I said, holding up my hand. "Before we have any conversation about making things right, I want to show you what I found today." I pulled out my phone and opened the photos I had taken of various social media posts. Let's start with you, Marcus. This picture was posted on your Instagram 3 weeks ago. You and Jennifer at that steakhouse downtown, bottle of wine that cost more than some people's weekly groceries. The caption says, "Celebrating my promotion to regional manager." Promotion, not job loss. His face flushed red, but he didn't deny it. And here's a fun one from Mom's Facebook. Posted 2 months ago, "Finally got my dream kitchen, thanks to my wonderful husband for making it happen." 23 like 16 comments about how beautiful everything looks. I scrolled to the next image. Dad's dental work. Posted on the family dentist's testimonial page just 6 weeks ago. Complete smile makeover with porcelain veneers. Funny how those medical emergency bills you mentioned were actually cosmetic improvements. The silence in the room was deafening. I caught them in lie after lie, and they all knew it. Sarah tried to salvage the situation with a different approach. "Okay, so maybe we weren't completely honest about some things, but Edward, we really did need help. Do you know how expensive everything is these days? The mortgage, the utilities, the car payments, the vacation to the Bahamas," I added. "Let me guess that's somehow essential too." "We've been planning that trip for over a year," Mom said defensively. "It's our 25th wedding anniversary. We deserve to celebrate that milestone." "With my money," I said flatly. "With family money," Marcus corrected, and there was that anger again, that resentment that I was starting to recognize had been building for years. Just because you ran off to the West Coast doesn't mean you get to come back and audit our lives like some kind of accountant. Actually, that's exactly what it means when you steal my inheritance. I sat down across from them, maintaining eye contact with each one. But here's what really bothers me about this whole situation. It's not just the money, though, that's bad enough. It's the planning that went into this. I pulled up more photos on my phone, screenshots of text messages that Sarah had accidentally sent to me instead of to Marcus 3 months earlier. Messages that at the time had seemed like random family gossip, but now took on a much more sinister meaning. "Sarah, remember this text you sent me by mistake in September? The one that said, 'M thinks E won't even notice if we're smart about it. Dad's on board as long as we handle the paperwork.' I thought you were talking about planning a surprise party or something. I never imagined you were discussing how to cover up stealing from me." Sarah's face went white as she realized what I was holding. "Edward, that's not— we weren't trying to—" "You weren't trying to what, get caught?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Let me paint you a picture of how this looked from my perspective. I live 3,000 miles away. I call home maybe once a month. And when I do, nobody ever mentions Grandpa's estate being settled, not once, for 3 years. I stood up and started pacing, the anger finally starting to break through my controlled facade. I send Christmas gifts, birthday cards. I remember anniversaries and graduations. I try to stay connected to my family despite the distance. And the whole time, you're all sitting here spending my inheritance money and laughing about how clueless I am. That's not how it was, Dad protested weakly. Then tell me how it was, Dad. Explain to me how four adults decided together that their family member didn't need to know about a significant financial inheritance. Explain how that conversation went. The silence stretched on for several minutes. Finally, Mom spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. We thought you wouldn't care. You have such a good job and you never seemed interested in money when you were growing up. I wasn't interested in money because I trusted my family. The words exploded out of me louder than I had intended. I trusted that if something important happened, you would tell me. I trusted that if there were family decisions to be made, I would be included. I trusted that being your son meant something. Tears started flowing down Mom's cheeks again, but this time they seemed genuine rather than manipulative. Sarah was crying too, and even Dad looked shaken by the raw pain in my voice. Only Marcus remained defiant. So what now? You're going to sue your own family, are? Take us to court over money like we're strangers? I don't want to take you to court, Marcus. I want you to acknowledge what you did wrong and make it right. But if you keep pretending this is somehow my fault for being upset about being robbed by my own family, then yes, I'll absolutely take you to court. The word robbed hung in the air like a slap. It was harsh, but it was accurate, and we all knew it. We're not criminals, Mom said desperately. We're your family. We love you. Then start acting like it, I replied. Start by telling me the truth about where every penny of my money went. Start by explaining why you thought it was okay to use my inheritance as your personal ATM. And start by canceling that vacation and figuring out how you're going to pay me back. I headed for the door again, but this time I paused before leaving. I'm staying at the Hampton Inn near the airport. You have 24 hours to decide whether you want to handle this as a family or through lawyers. Choose wisely. As I drove away, I could see them through the living room window, huddled together, in what looked like a very intense conversation. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had the upper hand. But I also felt something else that surprised me, sadness that it had come to this at all. The next morning, I was drinking coffee in the hotel lobby when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus's name, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity got the better of me. What do you want, Marcus? The kids want to see you, he said. And his voice was different somehow. Less aggressive, more uncertain. Emma keeps asking why Uncle Edward left so quickly yesterday. I told her you had work stuff to handle, but she's not buying it. I felt a pang of guilt. In all the drama with the adults, I had completely forgotten about Marcus's 3 children. Emma was 11 now, Tyler 8, and little Sophie had just turned 5. The last time I'd seen them was over video chat 6 months ago, and they had grown so much. Bring them by the hotel, I said after a moment. There's a nice lobby area where we can visit. Actually, Marcus said, and now he sounded almost nervous. Would you mind coming back to the house? The kids are comfortable here, and Sophie's been asking if she did something wrong to make you leave. The idea of walking back into that emotional minefield made my stomach clench. But the thought of 5-year-old Sophie thinking she had somehow caused family drama was worse. An hour later, I found myself back in my childhood home. But this time I barely made it through the front door before being tackled by 3 kids who seemed genuinely excited to see me. Sophie wrapped herself around my legs like a koala. Tyler grabbed my arm and started telling me about his baseball season, and Emma hung back slightly, but smiled wider than I had seen anyone smile in days. Uncle Edward, Mom said you might not be able to stay for Christmas because of work, Emma said, and I could hear the carefully coached explanation in her words. But you're here now, so does that mean you can stay? Over their heads, I caught sight of the adults hovering in the doorway to the kitchen, watching nervously. Marcus looked like he hadn't slept much, and the rest of them seemed to be walking on eggshells. I'm not sure yet, sweetheart, I told Emma honestly. There are some grown-up things I need to work out with your dad and grandparents first. Is it about money? Tyler asked with the blunt curiosity of an 8-year-old. Because I heard Dad yelling about money last night. The adults in the doorway tensed visibly, and Marcus started to step forward, probably to redirect the conversation away from topics he didn't want the kids discussing. But Emma surprised everyone by speaking up. Tyler, shut up, she hissed at her brother. You're not supposed to talk about that stuff. Something in her tone caught my attention. It wasn't just the normal embarrassment of a kid whose family business was being exposed. There was something else there. Something that sounded almost like fear. It's okay to talk about whatever you want, I said, gently sitting down on the couch so I was closer to their eye level. What money stuff did you hear? Emma glanced nervously toward the kitchen, where the adults were pretending not to listen to every word. Then she looked back at me with the serious expression that reminded me she was growing up faster than I had realized. Can we talk somewhere private? She asked quietly. The request clearly alarmed the adults. Mom started to object, saying something about how the kids didn't need to be involved in grown-up problems, but I was already standing up. How about we go out to the back porch? I suggested. It's nice outside and we can watch Sophie play on the swing set. Before anyone could protest, Emma was already heading for the back door with Tyler and Sophie following eagerly. I brought up the rear, pointedly ignoring the worried looks from the adults. The back porch had always been my favorite part of this house, a wide covered deck that overlooked the fenced yard, where Dad had built an elaborate playground for the grandkids. Sophie immediately ran for the swings while Tyler started climbing on the jungle gym. Emma sat down beside me on the porch swing, suddenly looking much older than her 11 years. Uncle Edward, she said quietly, are you mad at us? The question hit me like a punch to the chest. Oh, sweetheart, no. I'm not mad at you kids at all. Why would you think that? She was quiet for a moment, swinging her legs and watching Sophie play. Because Mom and Dad have been talking about you a lot lately, and it doesn't sound like they're saying nice things. What kind of things have you heard? Emma glanced back toward the house, checking to make sure the adults weren't close enough to overhear. Dad says you think you're better than everyone else because you moved away and make lots of money. Mom says you're trying to cause trouble for the family on purpose. I felt anger rising in my chest again, but not at Emma. At the adults who were poisoning these children's minds against me before I even had a chance to defend myself. And what do you think? I asked. She shrugged with the elaborate casualness that only preteens could manage. I think grown-ups are confusing. You seem nice. You always remember our birthdays and send cool presents. But everyone acts like you're some kind of bad guy. Tyler had apparently been listening from the jungle gym because he abandoned his climbing and came over to join the conversation. Dad told us you were going to try to take our house away, he said matter-of-factly. Tyler, Emma snapped, you weren't supposed to say that part. But now I was getting a clearer picture of what had been happening behind the scenes. Has someone been telling you what you should and shouldn't say to me? The guilty look that passed between the older kids was all the answer I needed. It's okay, I said gently. You're not in trouble. But I want you to know that I would never try to take your house away or hurt your family. The grown-ups are having a disagreement about some money stuff. But it has nothing to do with you kids. Sophie had given up on the swings and wandered over to climb into my lap, apparently unconcerned with the serious conversation happening around her. Her presence was comforting, a reminder that not everything in this family was tainted by adult dysfunction. Can I tell you a secret? Emma asked suddenly. I nodded. I heard Dad and Grandma talking yesterday after you left. Dad said maybe it would be better if we were extra difficult while you were babysitting us so you'd get frustrated and leave early. The manipulation was even worse than I had imagined. Not only had they stolen from me and lied about it, but they were now planning to use their own children as weapons in this family war. What did you think about that idea? I asked. Emma's face scrunched up with the kind of moral indignation that kids were capable of when adults behaved badly. I thought it was mean and stupid. You're supposed to be our uncle, not our enemy. Tyler nodded emphatically. Plus, I like you. You don't yell at us or tell us we're too loud all the time. Out of the mouths of babes. These kids had cut straight through all the adult drama and manipulation to the heart of the matter. Family was supposed to treat each other with kindness and respect, not scheme and plot against each other. Can I tell you guys something important? I asked, and all three children gave me their complete attention. No matter what happens with the grown-up stuff, I want you to know that I love you very much. You're my family, and that will never change, okay? Sophie looked up at me with her big brown eyes and asked, "Even if Daddy says mean things about you?" The innocence of the question nearly broke my heart. These children were being forced to navigate adult conflicts they shouldn't even know about, choosing sides in battles they didn't understand. Even then, I promised. Sometimes grown-ups say things they don't really mean when they're upset. But love isn't something that gets taken away just because people have disagreements. Emma was quiet for a long moment, then asked, "Are you going to stay for Christmas?" It was the question I'd been dreading because I honestly didn't know the answer. The thought of leaving these kids was painful, but the thought of pretending everything was fine with their parents was equally unbearable. "I'm working on it," I said finally. "But Emma, I need you to promise me something. If the grown-ups ask you to say or do things that feel wrong, you don't have to do them, okay? You're allowed to just be kids." She nodded solemnly, like I had just given her permission for something she had been wanting to do all along. As we sat there on the porch swing watching Tyler chase Sophie around the yard, while she giggled with delight, I realized that this family crisis wasn't just about me and the money. It was about what kind of environment these children were growing up in, what lessons they were learning about honesty and loyalty, and how family members should treat each other. Whatever happened next, I couldn't abandon them to the same toxic patterns that had driven me 3,000 miles away in the first place. That evening back at the hotel, I spread my laptop phone and a stack of printed documents across the small desk by the window. If this family situation was going to be resolved, I needed to understand exactly how deep the deception went and what I was really dealing with. The estate attorney I had hired in Seattle had been thorough, but he had focused primarily on the legal aspects of the inheritance theft. Now I needed to dig deeper into my family's actual financial situation to understand their motivations and capabilities. I started with public records. Property deeds, tax assessments, and business registrations were all matters of public record in Pennsylvania, and a few hours of searching revealed information that made my blood run cold. 6 months ago, my parents had purchased a vacation home in the mountains of North Carolina. The property records showed a purchase price of $185,000 with a cash down payment of exactly $75,000. The timing coincided perfectly with when they would have received access to my inheritance funds. But that was just the beginning. The more I dug, the more disturbing the picture became. Marcus's truck wasn't just expensive, it was the top-of-the-line model with every possible upgrade. The loan paperwork I managed to access through a legitimate credit monitoring service showed that he had put down $25,000 in cash and was struggling to make the monthly payments on the remaining $40,000 loan. Sarah's wedding the previous summer, which I had attended via video call due to work commitments, had cost significantly more than she had ever mentioned. Vendor contracts I found through social media, posts, and wedding planning websites suggested a total cost exceeding $50,000 for what she had described to me as a small, simple ceremony. The kitchen renovation at my parents' house hadn't been a modest update, as Mom had implied. Building permits filed with the county showed a complete gut renovation with high-end appliances, custom cabinetry, and luxury finishes. The total cost exceeded $40,000. By midnight, I had assembled a comprehensive picture of where my inheritance money had gone. Every major purchase my family had made in the past 3 years had been funded, at least partially, with money that rightfully belonged to me. But the most shocking discovery came when I started examining their current financial situation through legitimate credit monitoring tools. My family wasn't just living beyond their means, they were drowning in debt. The vacation house in North Carolina was bleeding money. Property taxes, insurance, maintenance costs, and utilities were running them nearly $2,000 a month, money they clearly didn't have. Their primary residence was heavily mortgaged with a second mortgage taken out just 8 months ago. Marcus's credit report showed multiple late payments on his truck loan, 2 maxed out credit cards, and a personal loan from his bank with an interest rate that suggested he was considered a high-risk borrower. Even more alarming, I discovered that this Bahamas vacation they were supposedly leaving for after Christmas was being paid for entirely with credit cards. $7,000 charged across 3 different cards, all of which were already carrying substantial balances. My family wasn't just guilty of stealing my inheritance, they were in active financial crisis, and they had been using my money as a band-aid to cover problems that were much bigger than they had admitted. At 2 in the morning, I called the estate attorney's emergency line. "Edward, what can I do for you at this hour?" David Chen sounded tired but professional. "I need to know about damages and interest," I said without preamble. If someone uses inheritance money that doesn't belong to them for personal expenses, what kind of additional compensation might be available? That depends on several factors. How long has the money been misused? What was it used for? Can you prove deliberate deception rather than just misunderstanding? I spent the next 30 minutes walking him through everything I had discovered. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Edward Haychins," he said finally, "this isn't just inheritance theft. This is a pattern of financial fraud spanning multiple years. In Pennsylvania, this could qualify for treble damages, meaning you could potentially recover 3 times the original amount, plus attorney fees, plus interest, calculated from the date of the original theft." "What does that mean in dollar terms?" "Your original inheritance was $200,000. With 3 years of compound interest at the legal rate, plus treble damages, you could be looking at recovery of between $800,000 and $1.2 million. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what he was telling me. "Of course," he continued, "that assumes they have assets to cover such a judgment, which from what you've told me about their current financial situation seems unlikely. What happens if they can't pay? Asset seizure, garnishment of wages, potentially forced sale of real estate, including both their primary residence and the vacation property. Edward, pursuing this to the full extent of the law could literally destroy your family financially." After I hung up, I sat in the dark hotel room, staring out at the parking lot, trying to figure out what I actually wanted from this situation. Did I want justice, revenge, reconciliation, financial compensation? The truth was, I wanted something that money couldn't buy. I wanted my family to acknowledge what they had done, take responsibility for their choices, and commit to building a different kind of relationship going forward. But I was also beginning to understand that this situation was bigger than just family drama. My parents and siblings had made financial decisions that were unsustainable and potentially catastrophic. Whether I pursued legal action or not, they were heading for a financial reckoning that could destroy their lives. The question was whether I wanted to be the cause of that destruction, or if there was some way to help them find a path forward that didn't involve losing everything. As dawn broke over the Philadelphia skyline, I realized that the next conversation with my family was going to be very different from what any of us had expected. I arrived at the house at 8 o'clock that morning with a thick folder of documents and a laptop bag. I had barely slept, but my mind was crystal clear about what needed to happen next. The family was waiting for me in the living room again, but this time the dynamic was different. They looked exhausted and worried, like people who had spent the night realizing that their problems were much bigger than they had initially understood. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I set my laptop on the coffee table, opened the folder of documents, and began laying out printed pages in neat rows across the surface. These are property records for your vacation house in North Carolina. I said, placing the first set of documents in front of my father. Purchase price $185,000. Cash down payment $75,000. Date of purchase 6 months after Grandpa's estate was settled. Dad's hands shook as he picked up the papers. His face had gone gray. These are the loan documents for Marcus's truck. I continued sliding another set of papers across the table. $25,000 cash down payment made on the same day you transferred money from Grandpa's estate account into Marcus's personal checking account. Marcus didn't even try to deny it anymore. He just sat there staring at the evidence of his financial choices laid out in black and white. Wedding expenses for Sarah's ceremony last summer. Catering contract, venue, rental, photographer fees. Total documented expenses $51,000. Payment method checks drawn from the estate account. Sarah started crying before I even finished speaking. Kitchen renovation permits and contractor invoices. Total cost $42,000. Payment schedule shows regular draws from the same estate account that was supposed to be distributing my inheritance. I sat back and looked around the room. So far, that's $193,000 of my $200,000 inheritance accounted for down to the penny. The remaining $7,000 went to the Bahamas vacation you're supposedly taking after Christmas. The silence was absolute. Even the kids who I could hear playing somewhere upstairs seemed quieter than usual. But here's what I discovered last night that changes everything. I said, pulling out a new set of documents. Your vacation house is costing you nearly $2,000 a month in carrying costs. Your primary mortgage has been restructured twice in the past 2 years. Marcus is behind on his truck payments and has maxed out multiple credit cards. Sarah's student loans are in deferment because she can't afford the payments. I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward them. This is a debt analysis I put together based on public records and credit reports. Your combined family debt, not including mortgages, exceeds $140,000. Your monthly obligations exceed your monthly income by approximately $3,000. Mom found her voice first, though it came out as barely a whisper. How do you know all this? Because I spent the night figuring out exactly what kind of financial situation you're all in. And what I found is that you're not just thieves, you're drowning. The word thieves hit them like a physical blow, but I wasn't done. You didn't steal my inheritance money because you're greedy people. You stole it because you're desperate people who have been living beyond your means for years and using my money to paper over the cracks in your financial foundation. Dad tried to muster some indignation. Now see here, son. You can't just walk into our home and start throwing around accusations. I'm not throwing around accusations, Dad. I'm stating facts. I pulled out another document, the legal analysis my attorney had prepared. According to Pennsylvania law, what you've done qualifies as inheritance fraud. The penalties include treble damages, meaning you could owe me up to $1.2 million, plus attorney fees plus interest going back 3 years. The color drained from every face in the room. $1.2 million that you obviously don't have, which means asset seizure, wage garnishment, and forced sale of both properties. Marcus finally exploded. You would really destroy your own family over money? You'd put Mom and Dad on the street. You destroyed this family when you decided to steal from me, I shot back. I'm just the one pointing out the consequences of your choices. But then something unexpected happened. Dad started crying. Not the manipulative tears that Mom had been using for emotional leverage, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere broken inside him. He buried his face in his hands and just fell apart. Tell him, Mom said quietly, putting her hand on Dad's shoulder. Just tell him the truth. Tell me what? Dad looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. I have a gambling problem, son. Had it for 5 years now. Started with poker games at work, then online betting then. Well, it just kept getting bigger. The confession hit the room like a bomb. Sarah gasped. Marcus stared at his father in shock. How much? I asked. All of it, Dad whispered. The kids' college funds, the equity in the house, our retirement savings. I gambled it all away. Mom took over the story, her voice mechanical and distant. We found out about the extent of it 2 years ago when men started calling the house, threatening us if the debts weren't paid. That's when we took out the second mortgage and started borrowing from your inheritance. We weren't trying to steal from you, Sarah said desperately. We were trying to save the family. Dad owed money to some very dangerous people. And the vacation house, I asked. We bought it thinking we could rent it out, make enough income to cover Dad's debts and pay you back, Mom explained. But the rental market isn't what we thought, and we can barely afford to keep it. So the Bahamas vacation is our last chance to sit down with a financial advisor who thinks he can help us restructure everything, Dad said. We were going to figure out a repayment plan for you while we were there. I sat back in my chair trying to process this new information. My family weren't just financial criminals. They were victims of addiction and desperation, making increasingly bad decisions to try to solve problems that kept getting bigger. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Why didn't anyone call me 2 years ago when this all started and say, Edward, Dad has a gambling problem. The family is in crisis. We need help. The question hung in the air for a long time before Marcus answered. Because we were ashamed, he said quietly. Because you had built this successful life 3,000 miles away, and we didn't want to admit that everything here was falling apart. And because we were jealous. Sarah added, her voice thick with tears. Because it seemed like you had escaped from all the family drama and dysfunction, and we resented you for it. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than anger toward my family. I felt genuine sadness for all of us for the years of distance and misunderstanding that had led to this moment. Here's what's going to happen, I said finally. Dad is going to get professional help for his gambling addiction, not just counseling, but a real program with accountability and support. All of you are going to get financial counseling to learn how to live within your means. I pulled out a legal document I had prepared that morning. This is a formal acknowledgement of the inheritance theft, along with a structured repayment plan that takes into account your current financial situation. It's reasonable, but it's binding. And if we don't agree, Marcus asked, then I file a lawsuit tomorrow morning and you deal with the legal system instead of dealing with me. The choice was clear, but I could see the fear in their eyes. They were terrified that accepting responsibility would somehow make their situation worse. There's one more thing, I said. I'm not going anywhere. I'm taking extended leave from work, and I'm moving back to Philadelphia for 6 months to help coordinate Dad's treatment and make sure this family gets back on stable ground. The surprise on their faces was complete. They had expected punishment, legal action, or abandonment. They hadn't expected me to offer help. Why, Mom asked, after everything we've done to you, why would you help us? I looked around the room at these flawed, struggling people who were still, despite everything, my family. Because Emma, Tyler, and Sophie deserve better than growing up in a family that's falling apart, I said. And because running away to Seattle didn't solve anything, it just postponed this reckoning. I stood up and headed for the door, leaving the legal documents on the coffee table. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. Choose wisely. I didn't wait for their decision. While they were presumably discussing my ultimatum, I was making phone calls and setting wheels in motion that would change everything regardless of whether they agreed to my terms or not. The first call was to Dr. Patricia Williamson, a gambling addiction specialist who ran an intensive outpatient program just outside Philadelphia. I explained the situation and asked about immediate intervention options. Mr. Thompson, what you're describing sounds like a family system that's been organized around enabling addictive behavior for years, she said. Recovery isn't just about the addict getting help. The whole family needs to learn new patterns. How quickly can we start? If your father is willing, I can see him tomorrow. But I need you to understand something important. You can't force someone into recovery. He has to want to change. The second call was to a financial advisor who specialized in debt restructuring and family financial crises. The third was to a family therapist who could help navigate the relationship damage that had accumulated over years of secrets and resentment. By noon, I had assembled a complete support team, scheduled initial consultations, and researched treatment facilities. More importantly, I had made a decision that surprised even me. I was going to use my own money to solve this crisis, regardless of what happened with the inheritance situation. That afternoon, I drove to the offices of 3 different companies that held my family's debts and negotiated payment plans. Dad's gambling debts to dangerous lenders, Marcus's overdue truck payments, even the credit cards they had maxed out buying Christmas presents for kids who didn't need their parents to go deeper into debt. I didn't tell them what I was doing. I simply wrote checks and arranged for all the threatening phone calls and collection notices to stop. It cost me $38,000 of my own savings money I had been planning to use for a house down payment in Seattle. The family found out what I had done when Dad came home from work that evening and found a packet of receipts and paid in full notices waiting on the kitchen table. My phone started ringing immediately. "Edward, what did you do?" Mom's voice was panicked. "We can't accept this. This is too much." "You're not accepting anything," I said calmly. "I'm protecting my family from the consequences of choices that are threatening their safety and stability. But the money is my money to spend how I choose. And I choose to spend it making sure my nieces and nephew grow up in a home where their parents aren't getting threatening phone calls from loan sharks." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Are you still planning to sue us?" she asked finally. "That depends entirely on whether Dad shows up for his appointment with Dr. Williamson tomorrow morning." I hung up and continued making arrangements. By evening, I had secured a furnished apartment 2 miles from the family house, given notice to my employer in Seattle that I would be taking an extended leave of absence, and arranged for my belongings to be shipped east. When I arrived at the house the next morning, I found something I hadn't expected. My father was already awake, dressed, and sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the business card for Dr. Williamson. "I've been thinking all night," he said when he saw me, "about what I've done to this family, what I've stolen from my children's futures, what I've put your mother through." I sat down across from him. The rest of the family was presumably still asleep upstairs. "I called the gambling helpline at 3 this morning," he continued. "Talked to a counselor for 2 hours. She told me something that hit me like a punch in the gut." "What's that?" "She said that every dollar I gambled away was a dollar I stole from my family's future. She said I wasn't just destroying my own life, I was destroying the lives of everyone who loved me." He looked up at me with eyes that seemed much older than they had just days before. "I stole your inheritance, son. But I stole a lot more than that. I stole your trust, your sense of family, your faith that the people who are supposed to love you will actually protect you." It was the first real acknowledgement of responsibility I had heard from any of them. "Why now?" I asked. "What changed?" "You did." He smiled sadly. "You came back here ready to fight for yourself, but instead you ended up fighting for us. You paid off debts that weren't your responsibility to protect a family that had betrayed you. That's not the behavior of someone who's trying to hurt us. That's the behavior of someone who actually loves us." Over the next hour, the rest of the family gradually appeared in the kitchen. One by one, they found Dad and me having the most honest conversation our family had shared in years. Marcus was the last to join us, and his presence changed the energy in the room. He still looked angry, still carried himself with defensive hostility. "So what now?" he asked. "Edward sweeps in like some kind of hero, fixes all our problems, and we're supposed to be grateful." "Marcus," Dad said sharply, "your brother just saved this family from financial ruin. The least you can do is say thank you." "Why should I thank him? He didn't do this for us. He did it to make himself look good, to prove he's better than the rest of us." The accusation stung because there was a grain of truth in it. Part of me did feel superior, did enjoy being the one with the resources and stability to solve problems that they had created. But Emma chose that moment to wander into the kitchen still in her pajamas looking for breakfast. She saw all the adults sitting around the table with serious expressions and asked, "Is everything okay?" "Everything's going to be okay," I told her, and for the first time in days, I actually believed it. Marcus watched me interact with his daughter, and something in his expression shifted. The anger was still there, but underneath it I could see fear and vulnerability that he had been hiding. "I don't know how to do this," he said quietly. "I don't know how to be grateful when I'm also ashamed. I don't know how to accept help from the brother I've been resenting for years." It was the most honest thing he had said to me since I arrived. "You don't have to figure it all out today," I told him. "We've got time." And for the first time in years, that felt true. We had time because the immediate crises were resolved. We had time because I wasn't going anywhere. We had time because this family was finally ready to start telling each other the truth. The power dynamic had completely shifted, but not in the way I had originally intended. I had come home expecting to have to fight for justice and respect. Instead, I had ended up in a position to offer something much more valuable, the chance for all of us to build something better than what we had before. 6 months later, I was sitting in the same kitchen where this whole crisis had started, but everything had changed. The granite countertops were the same, the expensive appliances still gleamed with newness, but the atmosphere in the house was completely different. Dad walked in from his morning Gamblers Anonymous meeting, carrying a small white chip that marked 180 days of sobriety. He had lost 30 pounds, gained back some color in his cheeks, and carried himself with a quiet dignity that I remembered from my childhood but hadn't seen in years. "How was the meeting?" I asked, looking up from the financial spreadsheets I was reviewing on my laptop. "Good. Hard, but good." He poured himself coffee from the pot that Mom had started before leaving for her part-time job at the local library, a position she had taken to help with the family's rebuilt budget. "I'm sponsored to a new guy who just admitted he has a problem. Reminds me a lot of myself 6 months ago." The transformation in my father had been remarkable. The gambling addiction program had been intensive and difficult, requiring daily meetings for the first 90 days, weekly financial counseling sessions, and complete transparency about every dollar he spent. But it had also given him tools for dealing with stress and anxiety that didn't involve destroying his family's financial security. More importantly, it had given him a sense of purpose. He now sponsored 3 other gambling addicts and volunteered at the treatment center where he had gotten help. Marcus appeared in the doorway home from his lunch break at work. He had been promoted again this time to district manager and was thriving in a role that gave him real authority and responsibility. More surprisingly, he was excelling as a single father. Jennifer, his ex-wife, had decided during the family crisis 6 months ago that she couldn't handle the stress of the financial uncertainty and had moved to California with her sister. Marcus had been devastated initially, but the custody arrangement they worked out had actually strengthened his relationship with his children. "The kids are asking if they can stay an extra week in Seattle this summer," he said, grabbing a sandwich from the refrigerator. "Emma's convinced you're going to teach her how to code. And Tyler wants to see if there really are mountains you can see from your apartment." I smiled, remembering the excitement on their faces when they had visited me in April. Seeing the Pacific Northwest through their eyes had reminded me of why I had fallen in love with the region in the first place. "What did you tell them?" "That it's up to their uncle, but they have to finish their math workbooks before they go anywhere." The relationship between Marcus and me had been the hardest to rebuild. Years of resentment and competition didn't disappear overnight, and there had been several difficult conversations where we had to confront the ways we had hurt each other. But watching him step up as a father and take responsibility for his financial mistakes had earned my respect. More importantly, we had found common ground in our shared desire to make sure Emma, Tyler, and Sophie grew up in a healthier family environment than we had experienced. Sarah arrived shortly after Marcus left, bringing her laptop and a stack of wedding photography portfolios. She'd started her own business 6 months ago, focusing on affordable wedding photography for young couples, and was building a solid reputation in the Philadelphia area. "I got the contract for the Henderson wedding," she announced, setting her materials on the kitchen table. It's not huge money, but it's my biggest booking yet. Sarah's transformation had been quieter than Dad's or Marcus's, but equally significant. She had always been the family peacemaker, the one who tried to smooth over conflicts and keep everyone happy. Learning to assert herself and build her own financial independence had been a revelation. She was also the family member who had most directly acknowledged the damage that our family's financial deception had caused. "I've been thinking about the money again," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "The inheritance money, I mean. We had worked out a formal repayment plan 6 months ago, with the family paying me back in installments over 5 years. The vacation house had been sold, and the proceeds had covered most of the initial debt. The rest was being paid back through monthly payments that fit within their restructured budget. But Sarah had been pushing for the family to pay me back faster, even though I had told them repeatedly that I didn't need the money immediately. "You know my position on this," I said. "The payment plan we agreed to is fair and manageable. I don't need you to sacrifice your business growth to pay me back faster." "It's not about the money," she said, and her voice carried a conviction that reminded me she was no longer the uncertain young woman who had stood silently by while her family made terrible decisions. "It's about integrity. We stole from you. We lied to you. We need to make that right as quickly as possible, not just for your sake, but for ours." It was a perspective I was still getting used to. The family members who had once viewed me as an outsider and a threat now seemed genuinely committed to rebuilding trust and taking responsibility for their past actions. Mom came home from work around 3 o'clock looking tired but satisfied. The library job didn't pay much, but it had given her a sense of purpose and independence that she hadn't had in years. She had also started volunteering with a financial literacy program that helped families learn basic budgeting and money management skills. "How was your day?" I asked as she kicked off her shoes and collapsed into Dad's recliner. "Busy. We had 3 families come in for budget counseling sessions, and I think we really helped them understand how to set up emergency funds." She smiled with the kind of satisfaction that came from meaningful work. It's funny how much you can learn about money management when you've made every possible mistake yourself. As the afternoon wore on, Emma, Tyler, and Sophie arrived home from school full of energy and stories about their day. The house filled with the kind of noise and chaos that comes with active children, but it was joyful chaos, not the stressed tension that had characterized this household 6 months ago. Emma had grown at least 2 inches since Christmas and had started showing real aptitude for mathematics and computer science. She had been working through coding tutorials I had sent her and was already talking about summer internship programs for high school students interested in technology. Tyler had discovered a passion for baseball and was playing in the local Little League with the kind of intensity that only 8-year-olds could muster. He had also developed a close relationship with his grandfather, who attended every game and served as an assistant coach. Sophie, now 5.5, had adapted to her parents' divorce with remarkable resilience. She split time between Marcus's house and her mother's new home in California, but she seemed to thrive on the variety and attention from multiple sets of adults who were committed to her well-being. That evening, we gathered around the dinner table for our weekly family meeting, a tradition we had started as part of the family therapy process. These meetings gave everyone a chance to share concerns, celebrate successes, and maintain the open communication patterns we had worked so hard to establish. "I want to talk about Christmas," Dad said, which surprised everyone since it was only May. "It's a little early for holiday planning," Mom laughed. "I know, but I've been thinking about last Christmas, about how everything started, and I want this year to be different." He looked around the table, making eye contact with each of us. "Last Christmas, we treated Edward like an outsider, like someone we could manipulate and use. We were so caught up in our own problems that we forgot he was family." Emma looked confused. "What happened last Christmas? I thought Uncle Edward just had to work." Marcus and I exchanged glances. We had been careful not to expose the children to the details of the financial crisis and family conflict, but Emma was getting old enough to pick up on things that adults thought they were hiding. "Some grown-up stuff happened that wasn't handled very well," Marcus told his daughter. "But the important thing is that we learned from our mistakes and figured out how to be a better family. This Christmas, Dad continued, I want Edward to feel genuinely welcomed home. I want the kids to understand that their uncle is someone they can count on and trust. And I want all of us to remember that being family means supporting each other, not taking advantage of each other. It was a sentiment that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago, but now it felt natural and achievable. As the evening wound down and the kids headed upstairs to do homework and get ready for bed, I found myself reflecting on everything that had changed since that devastating Christmas Eve arrival. I had come home expecting to fight a battle for financial justice and personal respect. Instead, I had ended up helping my family rebuild their lives from the ground up. The money had been important, but it hadn't been the real issue. The real issue had been years of dysfunction, resentment, and broken communication that had created an environment where financial betrayal seemed acceptable. Fixing those underlying problems had required much more than legal action or financial restitution. It had required all of us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and commit to building new patterns of behavior. I was still living in Philadelphia, though I had bought a small house in the suburbs rather than staying in the hotel indefinitely. My leave of absence from work had been extended twice, but my employer was understanding about family situations and had assured me that my position would be available whenever I was ready to return. The truth was, I wasn't sure I wanted to return to Seattle anytime soon. Building a relationship with Emma Tyler and Sophie had become one of the most rewarding experiences of my adult life. Watching my parents and siblings grow and change had reminded me that people were capable of genuine transformation when they were motivated and supported properly. More personally, I had discovered that running away from family problems didn't solve them. It just postponed the reckoning and made the eventual confrontation more painful for everyone involved. As I prepared to leave the house that night, Sophie ran downstairs in her pajamas to give me a hug goodnight. "Uncle Edward, are you going to live here forever?" she asked with the directness that only 5-year-olds possessed. "Not forever, sweetheart, but I'm going to be around for a long time." "Good," she said, wrapping her arms around my legs. "I like it better when you're here." Driving home to my own house, I thought about the life lesson that had emerged from this whole experience. Fighting back didn't always mean fighting against people. Sometimes it meant fighting for them even when they didn't deserve it, even when they had hurt you deeply. True strength wasn't about proving you were right or getting revenge on people who had wronged you. True strength was about choosing to build something better, even when it would have been easier to walk away. My family had stolen my inheritance, lied to me for years, and treated me like an outsider in my own family. But they had also been drowning in problems they didn't know how to solve, trapped in patterns of behavior they didn't know how to change. By choosing to help rather than simply pursue justice, I had gotten something much more valuable than money. I had gotten my family back. Not the dysfunctional, resentful family I had grown up with, but a new version built on honesty, mutual support, and genuine care for each other's well-being. 6 months ago, if someone had told me that I would be living in Philadelphia, helping my gambling-addicted father stay sober while my family paid back money they had stolen from me, I would have thought they were crazy. But sitting in my driveway looking at the lights in my parents' house 2 miles away, where my nieces and nephew were probably finishing homework with their grandfather's help, while their father prepared for another day of responsible work and their grandmother planned another budget counseling session, I realized that sometimes the best revenge is helping people become the versions of themselves they always could have been. The greatest gift I could give my family wasn't my forgiveness for their past mistakes. It was my faith in their ability to build a better future. And the greatest gift they had given me wasn't the monthly payments on my inheritance debt. It was the chance to discover that love really could triumph over resentment, that families really could change, and that coming home didn't have to mean returning to old patterns of hurt and dysfunction. It could mean building something entirely new together. What's the most important lesson your family has taught you about forgiveness and second chances? Have you ever had to choose between justice and healing in your own relationships? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about family resilience and finding your way through difficult times, and share this with someone who might need to hear that it's possible to rebuild broken relationships when people are willing to do the hard work of genuine change. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose love over anger, even when anger feels completely justified. Until next time, take care of yourselves and the people you love.